Stay tuned. Ahead I'll talk with Robert J. Sawyer about The Downloaded. It's a science fiction novel about two very different groups of people who have their minds uploaded into a quantum computer. When circumstances force them to be downloaded back into their bodies, they face unimaginable challenges. We'll talk about the plot and the science behind the novel. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Robert J. Sawyer is one of only 8 writers in history and the only Canadian to win all 3 of the science fiction field's top honors for Best Novel of the Year, and you can learn more about his many other awards in the description below. On a personal note, I first talked with Rob back in 1998 and have talked with him about his novels ever since. So I'm happy to talk with him again about his latest, The Downloaded. Rob, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thank you, Dan. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, let's talk about this latest novel, The Downloaded. Give us a brief overview of the plot here.
The Downloaded deals with 2 different groups of people who have chosen to have their bodies cryogenically frozen while their minds are uploaded into a quantum computer. One group is a set of astronauts who think they're about to embark on Earth's first interstellar voyage, and the other group is a set of prisoners who have been given an opportunity to serve their cold, hard time virtually rather than in real time. They'll spend 20 years, as it will seem to them, uploaded into the quantum computer, but only 1 year will pass in the outside world so that they can decant back into civilization, hopefully with their marriage still intact, their children still children, maybe even their job still waiting for them, or at least their job skill set not completely obsolete.
But the twist here is when they are reunited with their bodies, they face an unimaginable challenge.
That's right. 500 years slip by while they're uploaded because a disaster befalls Earth and technological civilization just shortly after they've completed the uploading process. The astronauts, their bodies, their spaceship hasn't gone anywhere. And the prisoners, who, as I say, were supposed to get out in 1 year, have now done 5 centuries in terms of time passing in the real world. And the disaster is left, as far as these people in this community can tell, only them alive and a non-technological horse and buggy Mennonite community in the outlying areas surrounding them who survived whatever technological disaster befell Earth. And so those 3 very different groups have to find some way to live together and, continue on the human journey.
And I want to talk with you about the science behind a lot of this, because there is a lot of science involved, a lot of different themes you explore in this book. And one of them you've used many different times in your novels and something that you've followed and studied for years, and that's quantum computing. And for those who aren't familiar with that, can you sort of briefly explain that in layman's terms?
So when you use a regular computer, such as the one that we're recording on right now, it deals in ones and zeros, and either a 1 or a 0 can be the setting of any particular location in the computer's memory space. In a quantum computer, the reality, and it's the bizarre reality of quantum mechanics, is something can be multiple things at once. So instead of having a computer that can only have a 1 or a 0, in any given location in its memory, the quantum computer can have both a 1 and a 0 simultaneously. And that allows it to solve any kind of mathematical problem enormously faster than a classical computer can do it. And the reason I'm fascinated by this is twofold. One is it's just an absolutely mind-numbingly fascinating technology that will have lots of real-world, possibly negative connotations, because all of the ways in which we encrypt our banking information and encrypt, financial transactions, or even just encrypt our personal conversations are based on problems that are extraordinarily difficult for a classical computer to solve. That will be a piece of cake for a quantum computer to solve. So all of our security that we use today in electronic communication and e-commerce may become easily crackable by, bad actors with quantum computers when they reach the point where a bad actor could possibly afford one. But the other thing that fascinates me is Sir Roger Penrose, who is a physicist in England, and Dr. Stuart Hameroff, who's an anesthesiologist in Arizona, have said, quantum computers are much better analog, so to speak, for the human brain than classical computers. There's probably a quantum mechanical nature to consciousness. And I keep coming back to that theory because my job as a science fiction writer is not to go with what's necessarily the most likely explanation for any phenomenon, but the most entertaining one, the one that generates the most story possibilities that we can't easily dismiss by known science. And the notion that our consciousness is quantum mechanical in nature, and therefore quantum computers might be the only place where we could possibly upload that into, gives me all kinds of story possibilities, including the key plot point in my novel, To Download It.
And another one of those keys is quantum entanglement, in that the consciousness, the quantum computer will be on Earth, but the bodies will be in space, and yet because of quantum entanglement, they should be able to reunite.
That's right. And the quantum physics realm is so counterintuitive to everything we know. I just said, a 1 and a 0 simultaneously. Mind blown. What does that possibly mean to our rational conception of what reality is? And quantum entanglement is another one of these notions that two particles can be entwined in such a way that no matter how far apart they get, even light years, even across the width of the universe, no matter how far apart they get, change one of them and the other will change simultaneously. Not that it will take light years for the information to go between one and the other. Simultaneously, no matter how far they are apart. This has been really demonstrated in the laboratory, really is the way quantum particles work. And I use it as a way of the bodies were frozen and never and sent by a spaceship, supposedly, that never left, to Proxima Centauri, supposedly the closest star to our sun. And the consciousness that was stored permanently on Earth would instantly traverse that distance when the bodies were unthawed. It's real science, mind-blowing stuff, but that's what makes it so much fun to write about. Science fiction lets us play with these technologies before they're mainstream. These will be real technologies. They will really be impacting our real lives, if not this decade, certainly by the middle of this century. And we science fiction writers, we get to open our Christmas presents early and play with these toys before they're out there for the general public.
I'm talking with Robert J. Sawyer about Downloaded, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you'll know when I post new interviews. And thank you. Well, exploration of space, humans going to different planets, is part of the theme that is explored in this book. And even though, as you've already pointed out, one of those attempts didn't work out, there is, and I don't want to give away spoilers, but there is an element of talking about what it might look like if humans were able to colonize Mars and the adaptations that humans would have to make to live on Mars. So tell us a bit about that.
One of the most famous ideas in science fiction, and it's mooted in NASA and other places, terraforming. The idea that we will go to other planets and make them more like Earth, terra meaning Earth, form them more like Earth so that we can go around in, a shirt sleeve environment. But that takes an enormous amount of time and energy, and also a really kind of cavalier attitude to nature to say, oh, we'll go to Mars and make it just like Earth, as if Mars as Mars has no fundamental intrinsic value to humanity. It's so much easier, as we're learning with all the things we can do with gene manipulation and genetic resequencing, to modify human beings to suit the environment instead of the environment to suit human beings. We see this in a very limited sort of way, naturally occurring. Of all the Western Europeans who've climbed Mount Everest, they're accompanied by Nepalese who have greater oxygen ability to work in limited oxygen environments because they've naturally lived at these great heights. All the Sherpas have already been modified just through living generation after generation up the slopes of Everest and the other great mountains in that range. they've changed their bodies to suit the environment. And this is something that will happen naturally if we move to Mars. I'm 5'10" because I've been pulled down by gravity my whole life. The gravity on Mars is 35% the surface gravity as it is here on Earth. So even without changing my diet or doing anything, I naturally would have been 6'6", 6'8", 6'10" if I hadn't been pulled down by gravity. And that's without any genetic modification to suit myself. So yeah, Martians will become over time, even if they started as, Homo sapiens, if Elon Musk gets his dream to go to Mars, his descendants will end up not looking much like him. They'll be tall, attenuated. They won't need the musculature that we have. They will develop an ability to deal with lower oxygen atmospheres, not necessarily shirt sleeve on Mars, but certainly adapt to the conditions of that planet.
The other things that you point out is there's an adaptation not only physically, but also in terms of how they govern themselves and how they interact with each other. So that's another theme in the book, which is interesting because there's, again, hopefully not giving a spoiler, but there's a commonality between the old school Mennonites on Earth and the governance of Mars.
Mennonites have a policy that you're either in or you're out. You either abide by the rules of the community or you are shunned. You cannot participate in the community. And it's very strictly enforced. We have a very egalitarian technological civilization that lets anybody pretty much do whatever they want, including, as we saw in the last 2 years, unleash onto the world artificial intelligence without any government oversight, without any regulations controlling what can be done with it. We just go ahead and do these things. Well, on a community on Mars, I said, you would adapt, but there's no way we will ever adapt to the Martian atmosphere on its own, which is only 1% as dense as Earth's atmosphere, and mostly carbon dioxide, which we can't breathe. We have to breathe oxygen. So a Martian environment is going to be a closed environment, always, under some sort of dome. And we cannot... It's by our biggest problem today, right now, Dan, is we have tolerated for centuries businesses polluting the environment, dumping their waste into our rivers and lakes with almost no government intervention or oversight, maybe a little bit in the last few decades. But we ruined the environment of this planet because we didn't care about long-term consequences. You put yourself under a dome on Mars, the consequences are immediate. If somebody puts a hold on that dome, everyone dies. If somebody does any number of things that turn off the power grid, and people will freeze to death, everybody dies. So I wanted to take this blithe disregard for the environment that we've had, forever. I mean, people have been dumping garbage into, the Euphrates and the Tiber and the Nile since the dawn of time, right? And make it so that we cannot tolerate dissent. We cannot tolerate lone wolves. And a Martian environment is very much going to be that case. So like the quote unquote primitive Mennonites, the Martians have to say, no, you're either in or you're out. And we're going to use our technology. We're going to be 100% surveilled, under surveillance society. Now that's anathema to a lot of people and to the American spirit and so forth of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it may be a necessary reality if we're ever going to have any kind of space colony. You're either in or you're out, and we're going to make sure that you're cooperating.
Another thing you explore is robotics. And you talk about Asimov's Rules of Robotics, and you put it in a different perspective, which made me, for the first time, look at that entirely differently. So tell us a little bit about how that plays into this novel, of course, with no spoilers.
Well, and this is exactly right. The goal of what I try to do as a science fiction writer is, you've just made my day, Dan, because you said, I made you look at something entirely differently. Isaac Asimov, Russian-born American science fiction writer, passed away 20 odd years ago, 25 odd years ago, was famous for coining his 3 laws of robotics. And you get any textbook, a real actual textbook on robotics or on artificial intelligence, they're always in there somewhere. And they are very quickly: a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey all orders given to it by a human being, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And 3, a robot must protect its own existence, except where such protection would conflict with the first or second law. Seems benign. Asimov said these are the rules we would naturally demand and require of any artificial intelligence that we create. And I thought, my God, Isaac, if you just reword those slightly, it becomes a very nefarious statement. A slave may not injure a white man, or through inaction allow a white man to come to harm. A slave must obey all orders given to it by a white man, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And a slave, recognizing that he is the white man's valuable property, must protect his own existence, except where such protection would conflict with the first or second law. It's a plantation owner's credo. And I find it reprehensible that we as a species, the great 20th century philosopher, the Grinch, when he couldn't find a reindeer, said, well, if I can't find a reindeer, I'll make one instead to take over Whoville at Christmas time. And if we can't decided as a species that we're not going to have slaves of human beings anymore, why, we'll make slaves instead. And no matter how many times science fiction has depicted robots as property and as slaves, in the original Star Wars movie, Episode 4, Luke buys R2-D2 and C-3PO to use as farmhands on his plantation, shackles them with welded restraining bolts. C-3PO has to call Luke master throughout. It couldn't be more obvious, the parallel to Luke, or at least Luke's Uncle Owen, the owner of the plantation, being a plantation owner, and these being slaves, thinking, feeling beings. They don't get medals at the end of the film when everybody else is. Even Chewbacca, the walking inarticulate carpet, gets a medal for blowing up the Death Star. Not 3PO, not R2-D2. No matter how many times we've been blatantly shown that we are creating races of slaves, it never seems to click in consciousness that that's what we're doing. And I thought just restating Asimov's laws as what they are, a plantation owner's credo, might finally do what you said I'd done for you, which is flip a switch in your brain and make you look at it in a whole new way. That's the power of science fiction.
Well, there's so much more in this book. I, hope, I've touched upon a lot of themes, and there are others in this book as well that we didn't have time to talk about. What are sort of the big ideas that you hope that readers will take from this story?
To me, the biggest thing that I was trying to do was contrast the right stuff, as Thomas Wolfe defined it, that hyper macho competitiveness of astronauts, the right stuff being the title of Thomas Wolfe's famous nonfiction book about the Mercury 7 astronauts, the movie from the 80s of the same name, and the recent miniseries of the same name, with what we think of as the wrong stuff, which is what ends up getting people sentenced to jail. And to me, the thing that I've realized, and I grew up with Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, the American manned space effort to ultimately get somebody on the moon, as the background of my childhood. To me, I've come to realize that those things that Thomas Wolfe celebrated, that we looked for in our astronaut heroes, is identical to toxic masculinity as we define it today. This inability to get along with other people, this hyper-competitiveness, this overtly macho, and for female astronauts too, overtly competitive mindset. Whereas most prisoners, and I say fortunate enough to visit with prisoners. Sometimes they'll bring writers into a prison to talk to prisoners. Prisoners always have a story to tell. Nobody wants to listen to it. A writer can help them learn how to articulate that on paper. Most of them, of course, never intended to be in prison. Most of them have, at least to some degree, that they're victim of circumstances, and many of them are repentant for what they did. They're sad and sorry for what they did. And I wanted to put what you thought would be the heroes of the story, the astronauts, against who you thought would be the villains of the story, the prisoners who have now been decanted back into reality with the astronauts, and mix it up so that at the end you could say, maybe all those values that I was exalting in astronauts, I got to rethink because they're actually counterproductive to society. And maybe all those people that I dismissed out of hand as being malefactors, bad actors, evil people, maybe, I can't necessarily, they should be punished, and they have been punished. Remember, every one of them in this novel by this point is an ex-convict who has paid their legally mandated debt to society. Maybe I should be a little more compassionate for people whose life circumstances had them end up in some place very different where, but for the grace of the random forces of nature, you and I ended up within our own lives.
Well, this thoughtful sci-fi book is The Downloaded by Robert J. Sawyer. Robert, what's next for you?
So The Downloaded is only just out in print, but it's been out as an audiobook for 6 months. Audible paid me for an exclusive in advance of the print, and that was such a big success, to everybody's delight at Audible, mine as well, that they've asked me to compose an outline for a sequel. Now, I'm a big believer when you write a novel, you owe the reader a full experience, beginning, middle, and end. I've never written, this is my 25th book, I've never written a book that ends in a cliffhanger, because I think I want you to come back because you enjoyed the experience, not come back because you were frustrated by an incomplete experience. So The Downloaded, the novel, has a complete beginning, a middle, and end, an arc for all these characters. And then they said, but what about a sequel? And I feel a bit like Paul Den, who was hired to write the sequel to Planet of the Apes. There's no sequel here. The thing is done. The original, and then, and then he had to write a third sequel, a second sequel, a third. And every time he thought it was over and done, and then he had to squeeze out a whole different plot line. So I've done that with the outline, and it's just gone to Audible. If they accept it, it'll be another Audible original before it comes out in print. Otherwise, my next book may very well be The Downloaded 2, which has the working title, Ghosts in the Machine.
The novel is The Downloaded by Robert J. Sawyer. Rob, thank you for talking with me today.
What a pleasure, Dan. Thank you. Live long and prosper.
If you'd like to purchase The Downloaded, I've placed a link for you in the description below. And if you'd like to see more videos about books and their authors and a wide variety of topics, be sure to subscribe, like, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.